Hi everyone. I was talking to Rashid about what we have been working on in class, and he reminded me that we had been reading Humphrey, the creepy, crawly camping adventure, and we only had one chapter left. I would hate for you to have to go this long without knowing what happened, so I'm going to read you the last chapter of the book today. So sit back, get comfortable, get cozy, and enjoy chapter 5 called The Trouble with Monsters. When we left off, I'm sure you remember, Humphrey was pretending to be a monster to scare the boys. Let's see what happens next. "It's a monster!" Richie shouted. "Run for your life!" Art screamed. "Help!" Seth shrieked. They howled and yelled. They shouted and screeched. No matter how loud I screamed, I could never sound as loud as those boys. As I pawed the air and tried to look big, I heard footsteps running away from the tent. "Help! Help!" The shrieks moved toward Richie's house. The yard was quiet again. I relaxed, and I stopped acting like a monster. So the boys were afraid of some things, too. I hoped the boys weren't too scared, but I was glad that my plan had worked. Then I heard footsteps coming toward my tent. "Eek!" I squeaked. I knew it was probably just Mr. Hopper, but I didn't want to be caught outside of my cage. My friends might find out about my secret lock that doesn't lock, and if they did, they might decide to fix it. Then I'd be stuck in my cage forever and ever. So I dashed to my cage and pulled the door closed. "What's going on out here?" Mr. Hopper asked. He poked his head in the tent flap and looked around. The flashlight was still on, and so was the music. My shadow was on the wall, but now it was my shadow inside the cage. Mr. Hopper laughed when he saw it. "I think I see what happened," he said. He left and came back again with Heidi, Gail, Saya, and Miranda. "Are you sure it's safe out here?" Heidi asked. "I could hear those boys screaming from inside the house." Gail nodded. "I saw them running across the yard." "I'll show you what scared them," Mr. Hopper said. "Humphrey cast a shadow on the wall of the tent." He took them around the outside of the tent. "It looks huge," Miranda said. "It looks like a lion in a cage," Saya whispered. "But it wouldn't scare me," Heidi said. "Me either," Gail agreed. "Silly boys." The girl came back into the tent. "I'm not afraid to be out here," Heidi said. "Girls aren't afraid of anything," Miranda added. "Girls aren't afraid of anything," the girls all repeated. "It's funny, but I don't remember leaving the flashlight on," Heidi said. "Or the music." Saya, Gail, and Miranda didn't remember either. I didn't squeak up and tell them I had turned them on. The girls stood between the flashlight and the side of the tent and made funny shadows like pictures on the wall. Gail made a crocodile using her hands. I was just a little bit afraid when she snapped the crocodile's jaws. Miranda made a bunny rabbit with her hands. It had tall, flappy ears. Heidi made a dog. She wiggled her fingers and his ears flopped. Then his mouth opened and shut. "Woof, woof," she barked. That made Gail giggle. Miranda looked at me. "It's your turn now, Humphrey." I got up on my tippy toes and raised my paws in the air like a monster. The girls saw my shadow and laughed and laughed. I guess girls aren't afraid of anything after all. When it was time for the girls to go to sleep, Heidi's parents came out to the tent. Mrs. Hopper tucked all the girls into their sleeping bags. I settled down in my bedding. "Now get some sleep, girls," Mrs. Hopper said as she left the tent. "You too, Humphrey." Once we were alone, the tent was quiet, quiet, quiet. Outside the tent, things weren't so quiet. First, we heard something say, "Woo-hoo." Gail sat up. "What's that?" she asked. "An owl," Miranda answered. "At least, I hope it's just an owl." Then we heard a fluttering sound, like wings. "What's that?" Heidi asked. Miranda sat up and looked around. "It's the tent flap," she said. "At least, I hope it's the tent flap." It was quiet again, almost too quiet. I was feeling a bit nervous, so I hopped onto my wheel. Spinning always relaxes me. I forgot that my wheel makes a loud whirling sound. I don't notice it in the classroom where there are other noises, but in the tent it sounded unsqueakably loud. "What's that?" Gail asked in a frightened voice. "I don't know." Miranda sounded even more frightened than Gail. "It's just me," I squeaked. "Listen to Humphrey," Saya said. "He must have seen something." Heidi crawled out of her sleeping bag and stood up. "That's it," she said. "I'm sleeping in the house." "Me too," Gail said. "Me too," Miranda said. "And me," Saya softly added. Me too," I squeaked. The girls quickly rolled up their sleeping bags. They took their flashlights, the lantern, and my cage back to the house. As Saya carried my cage across the yard, I could see that the tent in Richie's garden was dark. I was pretty sure the boys had also gone inside. And even though I didn't see any real creepy crawly creatures in the garden, besides the night crawlers, I was happy to sleep inside too. Heidi took me back to school on Monday morning. When Mrs. Brisbane saw us, she asked how the weekend had been. "Great," Heidi answered. "I had a camping night in the backyard with my friends." "So did I," Richie said. "Oh," Miss Brisbane replied. "Were you scared to sleep outside?" "No," Heidi said. "Girls aren't afraid of anything." "Neither are boys," Richie added. They weren't exactly squeaking the truth, but I'm pretty sure they believed what they said. During class, Mrs. Brisbane asked, "What's the opposite of frightened?" Richie raised his hand and answered, "Fearless." Later that night, I showed Og the friendship bracelet on my cage. Then I told him about our creepy, crawly camping adventure. He splashed in his tank and said, "Boing, boing, boing, boing." The girls were scared and the boys were scared, I told my froggy friend. I wasn't afraid, I said. At least not much. But I think that's all right. For girls and for boys, and even hamsters, to be a little bit afraid of creepy, crawly creatures, even when the scariest thing in the yard turned out to be me. The end. That was a great story. Next up, we have Humphrey's School Fair Surprise. So we'll have to wait to see what that one's about. Thanks for watching. Rashid and I will see you soon. Bye.